action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, business and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chinwag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp and I'm Giles Edwards. Today I've caught Alex Jenkins. As the managing partner at Contagious, Alex possesses a wealth of expertise in the field, with a bonce bursting with industry knowledge that encompasses a myriad of past campaigns, current narratives and future predictions. Part editorial, part consultancy, part research, Contagious believes in the best version of our industry, one where creativity wins. Alex says, you will not find a single colleague, client, manager or recruiter who's going to look around themselves and say, you know what we need around here? More people who know less. No more. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Well, thanks very much for having me.
Right, 7 quickfires, Alex. Book or Kindle?
Kindle. Kindle, 100%.
Batman or Zorro?
Batman.
Nice. GoldenEye or Super Mario Kart?
Gosh, I'm gonna go GoldenEye for the retro appeal of it.
Nice. Good strategy, bad strategy, or invisible ink?
Oh, come on, now you have done your research there. I know that a lot of your guests have already recommended good strategy, bad strategy. I'm gonna go invisible ink.
It is the most recommended book, actually. Beth did a count recently. Good stuff. Something that happens or something you create?
Something you create.
Nice, these are too easy. Mouldy Whopper or Dream Crazy?
Oh, I'm going to go Dream Crazy because I can't bear the backlash of saying Mouldy Whopper. I simply can't put the energy into defending again and again.
Okay, finally, this is from the most contagious things of 2022, playing Wordle or listening to Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush.
Let's go Kate Bush. What a year to come back.
What a year. Amazing. Listen, thank you so much for joining us, Alex. We always start the show by asking guests about their career, specifically their path to where they are now, because we find that it's rarely a linear one. In the research, I actually picked a line from an interview you've given previously where you actually said a linear path makes you similar to everyone else. So I'm expecting you had a wiggly way in.
Yeah. I like to joke that there's 2 definitions of the word career, and mine was very much the second, kind of wiggling all over the place. So, in terms of how I got to where I am, it really was quite a strange journey in some way. I guess writing was always in some way at the centre of it. I did an English literature degree, and when I graduated, I got a job as a local business journalist, which was kind of interesting. It was everything from like local pub openings to like one day, and then you go and interview the company that made guidance systems for like missiles and space shuttles the next. Then I did an awful lot of like temping work. I think it's like data entry stuff weirdly may have influenced my life. If I'm totally honest, I get a little bit hazy on the order of my career because I did a lot of parallel track stuff. So I did that. I did work in film production for a little bit. Worked on a film by Lynn Ramsey called Northern Colour that I think did quite well at Count. The critics loved it. No one else seemed to like that.
Often the way.
And then basically did a whole bunch of different stuff. Let me shortcut this. And more recently, ended up in the knowledge department of the IPA. And from there, joined Contagious about 13 years ago. But so that was kind of like the day-to-day things they paid me for. But then I sort of had this kind of parallel track evening thing where I was also doing a bunch of, I guess you'd call them kind of creative projects. I played in bands a lot. We used to play around London. We recorded an album that, weirdly, like in 2005, it made the Critics' Choice in like the Billboard roundup of like Billboard magazine's roundup of the year.
Oh wow!
Above the Rolling Stones. Could not get any money out of that whatsoever. I wrote a book. I wrote a kind of a comedy choose your adventure book, which also sank without trace due to Girls Aloud taking our marketing budget. True story. And then, a bunch of other like kind of random stuff, like random like parody Twitter accounts and things like that. So I suppose like in terms of like kind of the office day job, there was kind of getting paid for stuff, and then there was doing like a lot of creative stuff, largely kind of, I guess, in some way or other, kind of involving writing or just making stuff. And then Contagious kind of brought it all together in writing about creativity and making magazines and things like that. So pretty non-linear. And there is a chunk of my career I've kind of skipped out as well, because it's a little bit of a black hole.
Okay. So going back to being maybe I suppose a young adult, but even prior to that, was music something that you got into early? Was creativity broadly something that there was a pattern forming? So as in, what did you want to be when you were looking into careers and exploring opportunities at college or university or whatever that might look like?
If I'm totally honest, I don't remember looking into it.
Yeah.
Like with any actual intent at all. I really liked music. I got into music at a very, very early age. I played around in bands since I was a teenager. And I used to love being in recording studios, just like the most fun place to be. But also loved writing. Huge fan of reading. Again, from very early age, I've still got letters that I wrote. I had letters from people like Roald Dahl and Douglas Adams. I'd write to them and they'd just reply. I'm sure it's some secretary kind of knocking it off. So I was always interested in that sort of stuff. I kind of got to the end of university, and having an English degree kind of qualifies you to kind of do nothing in a way. And it was really just like that kind of Wile E. Coyote running off the edge of a cliff. It's like, you've been on the tram lines of education, and then it came to a halt, and it's like, I wonder what happens next. And I wonder who's going to, no one's going to sort it out for me. Right, okay. And ended up, as you can kind of tell from my career history, kind of pinging around a little bit until I found something that felt right for me.
I love that term, coming off the tram lines of education, because I think lots of people, including myself, can relate to that.
Yeah.
Because everything else is exactly that, right? It's a path that you kind of follow, and you almost do so unconsciously until a point.
Yeah, I was asked to give some advice to someone recently who'd basically done an English degree and was like, what the hell happens next? And my advice was probably pretty useless, to be honest. But I was like, look, it's very hard to know precisely what you want unless you actually, and this guy clearly did not know precisely what he wanted. But I was like, you kind of need to move in a general direction. So it's like, if you know you want to go on holiday, you might broadly want to go south. And you don't know that you necessarily want to go to Madrid or Rome, but start heading south. So if you know you kind of want to work in the media, head towards that. Or if you know you want to work broadly in something, and then kind of refine as you get nearer. And I kind of wish someone had told me that at the time.
But you're right about that quote of yours I mentioned before you gave your answer about a linear path makes you similar. I think that it's only really via recording these episodes I've come to the realization that the most kind of interesting, often the most successful, but perhaps not always, people tend to have taken a very scenic route.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember speaking to someone that had was making video games, but in an advertising context. And they're going, yeah, it's really weird. We used to do this very linear kind of campaign, sort of narrative stuff, and now we've got to make this gaming thing. And as he was describing it was like, yeah, that's exactly how I wrote a choose your own adventure book. It's literally the same thing. So it was weirdly able to be empathetic about something. And then it was very much outside the work sphere that suddenly became inside it.
Yes, yeah, that makes sense. You can't make a throwaway comment like Girls Aloud took your budget without unpacking it a little, by the way.
Okay, so I think the book came out in 2008. So it was, peak financial crisis. And so it's me and a very funny guy co-wrote this book, a guy called Steve Morrison. And we were just a pair of nobodies who had this idea for a choose your own adventure book. You don't remember the old fighting fantasy books? It was kind of like that, and the idea was you were just a data entry temp working in an office, and the object of the quest was you had to get your timesheet signed. But everyone that you worked with were fantastical creatures. So it was like gorgons and minotaurs and stuff like this. And so it was, and we got picked up by Transworld, which was Terry Pratchett's sort of publishing house.
Nice.
And yeah, I thought I'd drop that in because, as if I was
I love Terry Pratchett.
If I was anywhere near as good as him. Nowhere near as good as him. And then obviously the financial crisis happened. And the marketing department clearly thought, we are not going to take a punt on these two chances. So put all the money into the Girls Aloud book that was coming out. So two complete unknowns with no existing audience kind of got their marketing cut from under them. And still a little bit salty about it, if I'm totally honest.
I would be too.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Contagious then. So you've been at Contagious for a while now. Your role has evolved presumably quite significantly in that time. What's directed that evolution?
I mean, in terms of the role, it kind of yes and no. Because I joined as a writer analyst, and a lot of what we do at Contagious is just the analysis of creativity and strategy, and then kind of worked up, through being the digital editor, then took on the editing as well as the digital stuff, the magazine as well, became the editorial director, and now also look after sort of content for things like our events, in addition to the other stuff. So it's kind of taking on more and more in a way, but I guess like anyone, it means I'm responsible for it, but I don't actually do it as much as I used to. But what I love about what we do at Contagious is it's always kind of looking at what's changing, what's new, what does it mean for brands, what does it mean for advertisers. And so the nature of what we look at is changing. So it really never feels like a static job, because there is always something new coming on, something new to investigate. So it's, whether, a couple of years back, there was a big sense of, the notions of masculinity are changing. So it's really looking at quite, kind of consumer attitudinal stuff. And then obviously the more, being Contagious, looking at the tech stuff, everything from, I was there, like the rise of Facebook, Facebook gaming, all that stuff, through to, sort of VR, AR, AI, so all the tech stuff as well. So kind of whatever is, changing out there in the world, whether it's, sustainability, climate crisis, it comes into our remit because it's change. And that is just, for me, is just fascinating. As someone who's just curious about what's going on in the world.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember talking to Bob Hoffman about 3, maybe even close to 4 years ago, one of our early episodes, and we were talking about how the industry, I believe increasingly so, but maybe that's an ignorant take on it, but that increasingly the lines between our industry and the wider sense of, I suppose, culture globally seems to be merging, whether that's ad tech, whether it's, say, like Facebook, as you mentioned there, and the kind of surveillance technology which drives a lot of the commercial sides of their business, or whether in fact it's something more recent like AI. So from an editorial perspective, it is very interesting, and I suppose you are holding up a mirror to that. So it must be quite a big mirror.
Yeah, it is. And I think, I don't know if maybe your listeners will write in and tell us this. My paranoia is that people think that Contagious is obsessed with and champions the kind of the shiny new crap, for a better term. And it's not that. It's more that we want to look at something and kind of triage it and go, is this useless? Is it a distraction? Or actually, is it a new thing? So you wouldn't want to have dismissed, and this is a dumb example, but something as big as mobiles, like, it's a new thing. Should we have, should we probably be dismissing things like NFTs and what have you? It's like, well, probably. But we still sort of, serve as that kind of triaging function to go, look, we will go off, we'll do the research, we'll look at it. And, increasingly, I think, as a lot of that kind of, especially the tech stuff, does impact on people and their wider lives, that it does come more into our industry.
Yeah, it's a nice way of putting it, that it's more of a triage process. And I guess that's where naturally the consultative side to Contagious kind of comes into play. How is it easy to remain objective with your analysis and your conclusions around what's happening, whether it's technology or whatever it might be? Because you wrote in last year's Most Contagious report, which made me laugh actually, based on the data set of literally just my opinion, I believe this year has seen a nearly complete lack of visually iconic work. I think it's really important that that caveat needs to be applied to a lot of the kind of discourse in our industry. Is that a tough line to find, though, to be able to comment subjectively and objectively, given the implications of what you might be saying?
I think I mean, we have a few, like the kind of checks and balances, I guess. The process and the way we work at Contagious is it's incredibly collaborative. So it's very rare you'll either read something or you'll see something on stage at an event that hasn't actually had the input of a lot of people on it. So you get that kind of, look, I think this, and someone will go, yeah, but what about, consider it from this angle? And it's one of the skills you pick up at Contagious is you learn to see things from a lot of different angles. So, what I kind of talk about, kind of walking around a problem until you kind of see it from all the angles. And it helps to have other people doing that. So that kind of keeps you objective to a degree. But there is also just an element of, you've got to have a sense of, I believe it, but I've got to be able to back it up. If we think something is good or worth paying attention to, you have to justify it. You can't just make a sweeping statement like, NFTs are the future, or, purpose is dead. It's like, I'm not saying you're right or wrong, but if you can't prove it, then, I'm just gonna dismiss it entirely. I think it's the sort of Christopher Hitchens has a quote. No, it's not a quote. Christopher Hitchens has a line about anything that's sort of asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. And it's that kind of mindset.
Nice. Yeah, no, that's a very healthy one to take. And what do you currently think of the advertising industry? So if we were to triage it, even if that's a very crude thing to ask you to do, what is there perhaps that we can be excited about? I'm always mindful when I ask questions around this topic, Alex, that especially when I cue it up as, the state of creativity, for example, it's all too easy to be, negative. And at the moment, I think people need a bit of, need to be lifted slightly. Certainly moods need to be lifted within the industry. What do you think about the current state of creativity in the industry, and what can we be positive about?
Okay, I'm going to give you a two-part answer, because the first part is a bit negative, and then I'll do the positive bit, if that's all right. Because I think, and I'm going to kind of blow it out slightly, like wider than the ad industry. Because I think if you look at creativity in general, I think we're in a weird place. So, for example, I was reading, there's a guy he's a musician who's done an analysis of the Billboard Hot 100. And he said, look, pop music is far less complex than it used to be. The chord progressions are more basic. The melodies are more generic. Overall, music is less creative than it used to be. And then you look into somewhere like Hollywood and, and there's just more sequels, there's more franchises. I saw a stat the other day that, like, in 1981, 16% of the most popular new releases were sequels. By 2021, 80% were sequels. And that's not creativity, that's repetition. A lot of it, like you look at like the Marvel films, the Star Wars universe, like the J.K. Rowling, the Wizarding World, like all these franchises that just regularly roll out, the creativity happened decades ago. They're just kind of, applying variations on it. And Richard the film director, Richard Linklater, was interviewed recently. He said something that I wrote, it's a little bit of a long quote, but I wrote it down because it was so interesting. He said, with a changing culture and changing technology, it's hard to see cinema slipping back into the prominence it once held. I think we could feel it coming on when they started calling films content. But that's what happens when you let tech people take over your industry.
Yeah.
Now, that sounds pretty familiar to me.
It really does.
And I think, right, so let me conclude the first part of my negative answer, which is I think we are seeing a lot of that kind of the tech people taking over the industry. That's an overstatement, but there's a lot of that. And it's that sense of, this is not creativity. This is doing nothing wrong, but not necessarily doing anything right. Okay. And I think that there is a bit of that going on. Okay? And I think now let's move into the slightly sunnier stuff. Okay. I think post-COVID, looking at, and as well, a little bit of context. So our remit at Contagious is to look at like the output of the global ad industry, right? So we look at, I don't care what country it's from, we will look at absolutely everything, but all we're concerned about is the best. And I think post-COVID last year, the UK and Europe was probably one of the poorest years. I think, and that's the quote you sort of mentioned earlier was my view on that. Was I just don't remember being so poor. I think it's actually significantly better this year. I think the USA is having a poor year this year, but I actually think people are beginning to get their mojo back. a little bit. We had this kind of came out of a little bit of like a creativity recession. But I think people are kind of pulling their bootstraps up. And is that a phrase?
Yeah, why
Pull
not?
themselves up by the bootstraps. People are getting their shit together. There we go. You asked for a crude answer. That's the crude answer. And we're seeing some interesting stuff. I think people using technology in fun and interesting ways, and people just making ads that are fun. And like, dear God, we missed that for so long.
Without any intention whatsoever, I find myself, when we talk about creativity and ads being fun, I can't help but think of some of the early Barclaycard ads that Paul Feldwick did with Rowan Atkinson and similarly daft and silly, but effortlessly humorous and fame-driving campaigns of the past. And your first part of your answer, talking about tech people taking over creativity, albeit you kind of said it maybe wasn't quite as significant or absolute as that, but I think it kind of is in a way. And I think it is. It's kind of passively happening too, as technology takes over so many areas of our life. And I suppose maybe this could be a crowbar, but maybe that is a nod back to that point I was saying earlier, where the industry is kind of bleeding into all aspects of our life, and I find it harder to separate the two when it comes to reliance on technology. I'm not quite sure what my question there is, Alex. It's more a summary of what you just said, I suppose.
More of a comment than a question, yeah. No, but I agree.
Yeah.
I do agree. I think you're right on that. The pervasive nature of technology in people's lives, and because advertising and marketing is just concerned with people at the end of the day. It's trying to get their attention and influence them. And if technology is big in their lives and it's how they are spending a lot of their time, then it's a read that we need to. We can't just turn our back on it and go, well, it wasn't like that in Burnback's day.
It's interesting, that stat around movie sequels too, because it almost contrasts with a lot of the, I would suggest, the right advice that's given around adverts not wearing out, in as much as actually people change too frequently in ad land.
Yes.
You mentioned creative recession there. I know you also like to talk about the kind of anti-creative forces at play. Is that easy to summarise what they are?
Yeah, I think as an industry, we really like to celebrate creativity, which is good, and we should. But I think a more practical thing to do is look at what stops us from getting great creativity. And I think to summarise, I guess, anti-creative forces, there's quite a few of them, but I think a really key fundamental one is by definition, creativity is something that is new and it's novel, which makes it risky. And nearly every business you'll find is highly risk averse, right? And they don't want to take risks. If you look at the way we motivate people and we manage people, it's not based on the risks they took. It's based on I'll set you KPIs. These are your objectives for the year, and we'll review them at your appraisal. And if you turn up and go, I completely did a 90-degree tangent to do something else, people really don't like that. Your CFO tends to get very, very nervous around anything to do with risk, rather notably. And there's a lot of internal kind of mental biases. People are there's a fascinating study that we quote a lot at Contagious. It came out of Cornell University, but it said that even when people say they want creativity and they think that they want creativity, actually they reject it. And so a lot of anti-creative forces are to do with kind of risk aversion one way or another. And then you look at, and that's always been the case. I think if you're an ad agency, you're built around creativity. But if you're on the brand side, a lot of what you do is not to do with creativity. It's kind of like one bit of your job, and you have this real kind of, gear crunching kind of gear shift change to go from, things like, distribution, the product placement, all that sort of stuff. And then the creative bit. And you can see why people, struggle sometimes with that. And then, to bring it into this year, you throw in things like, look at AB InBev, what happened with, Dylan Mulvaney. I think they lost, was it 27 billion in their market value? And things like the risk aversion just goes up. So I think there is a rational, you can quote, Les Binet and Peter Field and all the stuff at me, and I get it. Rationally, I get it. But I think there's kind of, in the same way, I rationally know I should eat more salad and go for a run. But do I do it? The fuck I do. And, I think that is the challenge. It's knowing that rationally you want it, but just the mindset and the process and the way your company runs and kind of almost the muscle memory of the company, if you try and pull away from that, snaps you back into doing the logical, the rational. And I think it's exacerbated by tech, where it's like, well, now look at all the data we've got. And the data it won't tell us what to do. And to my point earlier, it's like, I always feel like data will frequently, I don't want to overstate this, but frequently will tell you the thing to do that is not wrong. But it won't always tell you what to do that is actually right. It won't do the breakout thing.
Nice. So how do you metaphorically get people in the business to eat more salad and go jogging?
Well, I don't want to turn this into a plug for our business, but we do have an entire, that's almost entirely what our advisory department does, is exactly that. So if it's quite a, not standardized, what's the word I want? It's quite a methodical process, where first of all, we convince, we pull out all the evidence, salad is good for you, creativity works. We'll get you to recognize what good creativity looks like, help you evaluate. So we do a lot of work with people creating tools to help them talk about and evaluate something as subjective as creativity in an objective way. Because Giles, I'm sure you're aware of this. A lot of talk can devolve into, I like it or I don't like it. And it's just like, I don't care whether you like it or not. Like, do you think it will work? And what do we mean by work? Will it get attention? Will it actually, will it create the memory structures that we need it to make? Will it stand out, be distinct from, all the other, kind of generic stuff in our category? And then, we can help train people to brief their agencies better, evaluate the ideas that come back, all that sort of stuff. Like the first step is always, you've got to recognize, first of all, why creativity is important, and then kind of recognize your own biases. I was talking to a marketer from the Middle East recently who was saying that, they always struggle to get their ideas kind of sold in to the CEO. And so the way they framed it, but what they found out was this guy likes to be seen as a bit of a maverick. So they said they'd present two pretty dull ideas and go, and then they'd say, but then there's a maverick idea. And the guy was like, yes, love it. And it was changing the terminology between, well, here's something that's risky. Because I was like, I don't know about risk. But if you change the terminology to be, and the maverick thing is maybe works for one guy. Right? But if you change the terminology to like, but here's something like I believe genuinely will get attention. I think we will stand out against our competitors. All of a sudden, it doesn't seem risky. It seems like, well, that's correct. That's exactly what we want to do. And so some of it is literally just reframing the language we use around this stuff.
Ryan Warman and I gave a talk a few years ago about why we felt it was absurd to talk about bravery when we talk about creativity, because actually the risky thing to do is to do the same as all of your competitors, right? So I think the semantics and terminology point you make is exactly right, and it's bang on. And I've noticed it increasingly, certainly in the last few years, and we should nod to Les Binet and Peter Field, as you say, and also Ehrenberg Bass Institute, LinkedIn B2B. I mean, there's so many people who are doing significant work to help us have those conversations and use the right terminology. But even something as seemingly trivial as rebranding brand awareness to future sales, for example, just makes the conversation feel more significant to people who aren't marketers in a department and who have, a critical say in the matter.
It's a funny one. Because we frequently give talks, at Contagious, where we're showing what we think is some of the best work and some of the interesting trends and blah, blah. And probably the most frequently asked question over the years we do this, someone comes up and says, that was amazing. I loved all that work you showed. How do I convince my boss to do more work like that? And you just want to say, you are literally in the business of persuasion. Persuade people or get a different job. But if you can't persuade the guy you work with to do it, how are you going to persuade some rando on the street to even buy your product? Kind of start at home.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think it is about. I think you're right. There's a lot to do with the terminology we use.
Time, weather, and
Today's podcast is sponsored by No One. Whether you need research, brand, or strategy, No One brings you absolutely nothing. With simple templates and drag and drop tools, you can have a great looking nothing in minutes. If you have a real marketing challenge you'd like to chat about though, just email giles@gasp.agency and use the offer code GILES to get 10% off nothing. Brought to you by no one.
Time, weather, and...
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there's great points made there. I'm slightly mindful of time because we've just gone over half an hour. I want to talk about the event you have in December, your most contagious event. Can you tell everyone what the day is about and why they should attend? Because it's an opportunity to celebrate the year that has been, right?
Exactly. So it's 7th of December in London. And it is what we believe to be some of the best campaigns and the brands of the year, and some of what we think some of the more interesting trends that people should be on top of for the year ahead. So the way we choose to, so we're not really like a lot of other events. We don't pick speakers. In fact, no one can submit to, no one can apply to speak at all. We just choose work, basically. So we've got what we think is an absolutely insanely good lineup. Here comes the hard sell. It's an insanely good lineup this year. Like if you name like one brand like above anyone else, this tower head and shoulders over this year, it's probably Barbie, right? We have got Lisa McKnight, it's Mattel's EVP and Chief Brand Officer, is going to talk about the Barbie story and how they pulled off what they did this year. We've got the McDonald's team talking about Raise Your Arches.
That was surprisingly good.
Thanks very much. Yeah, that's, I hope we don't get sued for copyright on that one. We have got a guy called Mike Dubrick, who's from Rethink in Toronto. So he is from Rethink is the agency that's been doing all the amazing work for Heinz Ketchup in North America. Which is then those are the guys that really kicked it off a couple of years ago, and it's now spreading out to other markets and other agencies. We've got the team from Dove talking about their Cost of Beauty campaign, which is all about the impact of social media and what it's doing to our daughters. And then a really fascinating campaign. We've got the guys from MasterCard talking about a campaign they ran called Where to Settle, which I don't know if it's particularly widely known in the UK, but it was basically an online service. I think it was an app actually called Where to Settle, which they created to help Ukrainian refugees who were coming into Poland, and they were trying to find they were most of them were trying to head to Warsaw to find homes and places to work, but it turns out there was many more opportunities for them in smaller towns, and the Where to Settle app was just helping them find sort of homes and jobs. And apparently, of about the 1.5 million refugees settled in Poland after leaving the war, 20% of them used this MasterCard app, which is it's great. I know there's a lot of people like, that sounds a bit purposely to me, but MasterCard is all about financial inclusion. It was all about getting people set up and finding jobs, and I think it was one of those moments where yes, it is purposely and it's doing good in the world, but I think it was so clearly aligned to what MasterCard stands for as a brand, and their business, that I think it was absolutely brilliant. So yes, those. Sorry, I went on a bit about MasterCard, but
no. To be honest, I'm glad you did, because actually, and I need to articulate this in a way that doesn't sound like I'm trying to challenge you or say anything unfair. So my point on the brands you've just given, and I'll take it back a step. I saw a wonderful response to someone, I think probably on Twitter or X or whatever we're meant to call that wonderful bin fire these days. And it was someone who just made an offhand comment like, I wish my business had a logo like Nike's. And someone, presumably a brand marketer, said, all you need is a simple icon, about £30 billion worth of advertising in about 70 years, which I absolutely adored, because I think the significance of these big brands is often missed, and really a lot behind that brand's success is historic, right? It's not necessarily the year that has just been. So my question around the brands who are at most contagious is there any room for smaller, lesser known brands perhaps? And I don't ask that to say we shouldn't celebrate Barbie and we shouldn't celebrate McDonald's Raise Your Arches, and I'm a massive fan of the Fiat ads. But I'm wondering, when I think about the context that I work in, which is typically smaller, often B2B brands, how much can really be taught to that level of marketer?
Yeah, sure.
Is that a fair question?
No, that's totally fair. And actually, we do, like, this year in some ways is a little bit of an anomaly in terms of the lineup, because the lineup are like, it's 100%, these big global brands. And in previous years, we've had a number of much smaller brands. I mean, if I'm totally honest, lifting the lid up on how the machine works a little bit, it's people don't really buy tickets to see a brand they've never heard of, right? So there is a little bit. So let's throw it into an analogy in the music world. Like, if you go to Glastonbury, it will be the headliner that kind of sells the ticket. But when you come away, it might be some act you've never heard of that was the best thing on the day. And a recent example from, I can't remember which year it was actually. COVID really did a number on my sense of time.
Oh, same.
I think it might have been 2019. I think it was 2019. There's a Spanish liqueur brand called Rua Vieja came along. And no one I doubt any single person in that audience had heard of these guys. And literally by the end of their talk, like, people absolutely like crying, people shaking their hands afterwards, because they ran this amazing campaign, which was, it wasn't like a feel-good campaign. It was all around bringing people together around kind of Christmas time. And they'd done this campaign, which you basically went on a website and you put in like some details about you and some details about a relative or a friend. And it worked out how many times you would see each other before you died. So it was like,
wow.
And it wasn't just like, oh, you've got X number of years. It was like, based on the number of interactions, people on average have with a friend or, a parent or whatever, you will see this person like, maybe 3 times in the next 5 years or next 10 years, whatever. And so, and then they play this very emotional TV ad off the back of it. And it was incredible. And sales went absolutely through the roof. It wasn't just a real, warm and fuzzies kind of job. Hugely effective campaign. I said, no one in the room had heard about this thing. So we do have room for those guys. And we do like to champion that. And in fact, on the day, so these are the brands that are speaking, but the Contagious team are also up. And they will be pitching a lot of their kind of lesser known sort of campaigns deliberately from around the world. So you'll get stuff from sort of Latin America or Asia that if you're in the UK or Europe, you probably will just never have seen. And so we'll be there doing that. It's kind of showing it the inspiration, then a bit of the analysis of what you can learn from it as well.
Nice. That's a great answer. I'm sold.
Yeah, good.
I think your Glastonbury analogy is bang on. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, well, it is true. It's like, people think they want to come and hear one thing, but when we look at like the audience feedback, it tends to be, the small thing that happened in some suburb of Paris that they never heard about. It was like, that thing was amazing. It's giving me so many ideas. I'm going to go back and I want to do exactly that.
Excellent. I'm going to move to listener questions now, Alex.
Yeah.
So asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger, but that's not stopped us asking. So Simon asks, you talk about knowledge being a launch pad. What is a key area our industry needs to acquire more knowledge in to make the industry better as a whole?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm gonna see if I can answer that in 2 parts, because my first answer, the thing that immediately sprung to mind, was kind of dodging the question, if I'm honest, which was, because I genuinely think that like a really broad knowledge helps, like massively. It's that, like a number of people have said this over the years, this notion of, kind of the more ideas you have in your head, the more things you know that you can connect together, the better your creative, the better the ideas you have. And so the ability to go, I was reading a thing about X over here, and weirdly it applies to Y over here, or it gives us a fresh perspective on that. Is interesting. I know we sort of mentioned earlier the book Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Richard Rumelt. I interviewed him last year and basically asked him like a similar question, about sort of case studies and learning. He said, actually, the best thing you can do is learn from outside your industry. It's like, because again, I know we've said this before already, but if you just look at your competitors, all you'll do is keep up. You'll never get ahead. You need to kind of look at things from outside. So that's part one. I would like, look at anything, look at everything. I suspect, looking at the way the wind is blowing, a healthy understanding, and like a real understanding of technology, even if you don't use it, I think just like it'll do you a lot of favors, because you will just be able to get a clearer sense of the direction of travel. Because I think that the main thing that is going to change the industry and probably change consumer behavior is probably technology. And if you're one of those people who's just like, oh yeah, but AI could never have come up with a slogan like, beans means Heinz, like, and just dismiss it, you'll never learn, right? You'll never learn. And I think it's a rather dumb analogy. I don't want to hear those kind of arguments anyway. But I suspect even if you are a dismissive person, better to know the tune that the devil is playing, kind of thing, would be my suggestion there.
Yeah, I think there's a funny balance between, I suppose, a natural cynicism, which I think people, it might be unfair to say this, I think people naturally become more cynical with age. Apologies if you're offended by that, but it obviously therefore means I'm increasingly cynical. But I also think the kind of truth that marketers are all part magpie equally is leads us to shiny and new. And just having that freedom to explore is the only way you're going to learn, as you say. Your point on broad knowledge is really interesting as well, actually. And it reminded me of a point, I'm sure it was Richard Huntington when he was on the pod a couple of years ago. I believe, and it's come up in other guises as well, with mostly strategists, I think, which is the practice of buying a completely random magazine when you're about to get on the train. Which I've always enjoyed the idea of that, and I've done it a couple of times.
Yeah, I love that.
Question 2 then is from Lauren. Lauren asks, what opportunities are you seeing for brands and agencies heading into the fast approaching 2024?
Broadly, being on the side of people is probably, is always going to do you well, I think. And we've seen, a lot of brands kind of, for want of a better term, dicking people around, shall we say. You've just gone through COVID, pretty rough time. Then you get hit by a cost of living crisis. And you see things like sort of shrinkflation happening, same price, you're getting less for your money. We saw a really interesting, it's not even a campaign, it's just a bit of marketing from the French supermarket Carrefour, where they were labeling products on their shelves. They labeled it #shrinkflation. If it was, it's the same product, but you're getting less of it. It's just like, it's paying the same price, but there's 15% less. With the implication being, so if you are, let's say there's tins of baked beans. I'm not naming any names. There's 3, household name brands. There's a basic one, right? But let's say there's 3. And they were labeled shrinkflation. But then there's the Carrefour brand, and it's not. So they're just basically saying, like, all these other brands, are taking you for a fool. They are turning twisting the knife, kind of thing. But Carrefour aren't. So shop at Carrefour. We are. We will point out these things, and we will. We'll tell you that we're not doing it, but we'll tell you who is doing it.
Amazing.
So that's just a really simple, just like labeling thing happening on the shelves. That is probably the thing. If you are, I don't want to go down an AI rabbit hole, if I'm totally honest, but I suspect there is a massive opportunity for brands in that area on the client side, and a terrible threat for agencies in that area. So, I think the whole thing about faster, cheaper, better. Kind of pick 2. My belief generally is that like AI is just going to be so much faster and so much cheaper, and so much that's so much of the output of ad land conforms to Sturgeon's law. Just the advertising industry is the poster child for Sturgeon's law. 90% of everything is crap. So if you can just do it faster and cheaper, I don't think people care too much about the quality, and I think that's a terrible risk for agencies. And I've already seen some agency holding groups like demoing their in-house tech, where it's like, and they even said, this used to take us a year, now it takes a couple of hours to achieve the same thing. Everything from insights into our audience, the media planning, creative ideas, like strategy ideas, all this stuff. Doing it in a couple of hours. And, don't try and tell me that's not going to whip jobs out of the economy, because I just don't believe it.
Yeah, I mean, especially in a world or an industry where we're commoditizing creativity into content.
Yeah.
It's almost inevitable, right? Faster and cheaper is compelling enough.
So, sorry, let me try this is super depressing. Let me try and flip this, perform the great magic trick, and flip that negative into a positive. So, I believe that is the way the wind is blowing. That's the direction of travel. So, as an individual at an agency, this is the person who's asked this question, I would look to be doing all I could to be useful and original and doing something unique that could not get, eaten by ChatGPT in a matter of months.
Yeah, give it a few years, but yeah. I love being on the side of people. It's reminded me again, this is not particularly helpful actually to share, but I'm going to share it anyway because I love the story. There is a bus drivers strike happening currently in Japan, and instead of just not turning up, the bus drivers are still honouring their routes and taking their passengers from A to B. They're just not collecting fares.
That is amazing. See, I love that.
Which is wonderful.
Yeah,
absolutely wonderful. Amazing, good answers, Alex.
I feel slightly depressing answers, but yeah.
The final part of the interview is our 4 pertinent poses then, Alex, starting with, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I would say, listen more and buy shares in Apple.
We've had Bitcoin, not Apple, before.
Yeah, well, I think Apple's probably a little bit more stable, let's say.
Yes, yeah. Number 2, if you could banish one thing from the industry, what would it be and why?
Right, I would banish, without hesitation, people without passion and people without humour. Seriously, jog on, make someone else's industry mediocre and tedious. We just do not want that where we live.
Brilliant. That's not come up before. I love it. Number 3 then, aside from the 2 we threw at you in the quick fires, are there any books that you would recommend to our listeners?
I got a couple books. I'm a big reader. I have to read a lot for my job. I read a lot, full stop. So I think, I've talked a bit of, around the edges about AI. There's a couple of things I think are worth reading. One is, I'm going to go quite kind of way back, kind of foundational stuff. So there's a 1920s play by a Czech writer called Karel Čapek called RUR, which stands for Rossum's Universal Robots, which is a story of a factory that makes artificial humans. It's the first use of the word robot in the English language. The robots become self-aware and they rise up, and it's surprisingly funny. But the ending is also, do you want a spoiler? Because the ending is absolutely perfect.
Go on then.
Spoiler is basically the robots kill everyone and then go, what should we do? And they just keep building houses. And they don't know why. Sorry, massive spoiler alert. Anyway, but I read RUI. It's over 100 years old, but insanely prescient. I would also have a look at, there's a book called The Human Use of Human Beings by a guy called Norbert Wiener, who's considered the father of cybernetics. He wrote it back in 1950. So the tech is massively outdated, but the cybernetics was the study of human-to-machine communication, machine-to-human communication, and machine-to-machine communication. And Howard Gossage found him fascinating.
Really?
Yeah. So, the book is a little bit dense, if I'm totally honest, but it's really interesting because the guy, so much of our life now is human-to-machine communication, machine-to-human, and increasingly machine-to-machine. I think it's very, very interesting to hear how the guy who first conceived of this was thinking about it. And I think the title of the book, The Human Use of Human Beings, is just increasingly going to be a question we need to apply ourselves to answering.
Yeah. And
then linked to that, I'd say any of George Orwell's essays where he talks about work, I think are very timely at the moment, especially how he writes about the need for, the human need for work as a purpose in life, beyond just making money. And then, so that's a little bit of a techie thing. Then the two additional ones. One is, I know we mentioned at the start, Invisible Ink by Brian McDonald. I recommend this absolutely all the time. It's just a very coherent, practical approach to narrative and structure. If you're into writing, copywriting, or even, to be honest, if you ever have to present or just write emails, this is good. It's quite a short book, highly enjoyable, and he'll make you realize that It's a Wonderful Life is effectively the same story as Terminator. And then lastly, just purely for the creatives, Lynch on Lynch. It's a book. I'm a big David Lynch fan. It's a series of interviews with David Lynch. I think he's a fascinating creative mind. I think the third series of Twin Peaks is probably the most uncompromising, creatively pure piece of television I have ever seen. You could call it self-indulgent, but I think that man just put every frame of his vision up on screen.
Amazing. Well, I think one of our past guests, Lee Grinnell, will be nodding along and smiling to that last one.
Oh, good.
Have you ever seen, I forgot the guy's name, sadly, but have you ever seen the guy who wrote the musical score to Twin Peaks?
Oh, Angelo Badalamenti, yeah.
That's it, yeah. Have you seen that short clip where he talks about, whilst playing the score, his original conversation, I assume with Mr. Lynch?
Yes.
Or whoever was involved.
Yeah. He's at a piano, I think it's an electric piano, and David Lynch is like, it's a forest and it's dark, and he's like, okay. And he's just playing along, he's just making up, and David Lynch is like, print it, that's it. That's the one. Yeah.
It's glorious. It's absolutely glorious. It makes me very happy to watch. I'll link to that. So, yeah, these are wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Any more? You're going to stop at 5?
I could keep going. I mean, everyone said good strategy, bad strategy. I would re-endorse that. Richard Ramel does have a new book called The Crux, which is also worth reading.
Thank you, Alex. And then number 4, we always dedicate every episode to someone, and we bestow or hospital pass that honour, depending on your view, to our guest, who has to give their reason why.
I have not. Tell you what, let's dedicate it to David Lynch. I think if he ever finds out, I'd just like to see the puzzled look on his face.
Amazing. Well, that's a wonderful dedication. This episode is very proudly dedicated to David Lynch. So as a final call to action, we will link to all of the books. So specifically, Are You Are, The Human Use of Human Beings, great title. Any of George Orwell's essays, so we'll pluck a few out. Invisible Ink, Lynch on Lynch, and of course the old favourite, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. There's a reason it comes up time and time again though, so if you haven't read it, please do familiarise yourself with it. We'll link to Contagious and specifically Most Contagious, which happens on the 7th of December. How else can our listeners get more Alex Jenkins?
To be honest, I am not. I'm not here for the social media side of things. I'm on X, formerly known as Twitter. I'm very much on receive. If you want more of me, honestly, just drop me an email. We'll go to the pub.
Nice. Brilliant. Well, listen, Alex, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. I've enjoyed this immensely.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. Hopefully it wasn't too rambly and unfocused.
Not at all. Finally, thank you to everyone listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do share and review. Keep the questions and guest requests coming in. To get in touch, it's easy to find Gasp online, or you can just email the mouthful, that is call to action at gasp.agency.
I can't get no call to action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try.